Let's now begin to center ourselves as we move into our time of meditation. Just closing our eyes and just allowing the breath to flow naturally. Just relaxing into this moment. Just releasing any tension and just really beginning to practice to move into the phrase of what it means to let go and let God. Aligning with your higher self and just allowing your higher self to take the helm. Just beginning to accept that all of your experiences up until now have led you to this present moment, to this present spiritual journey, this beautiful spiritual journey. It is through this letting go and letting God that we have grown in wisdom, better able to discern what it is that is ours to do, what it is that is mine to do. It is through this letting go and letting God that we're able to discern what it is okay to take on and when it's okay to ask others for help. And perhaps most importantly, it's knowing when to use my will and my determination to make things happen and when to just simply let go and let God. Perhaps you're able to remember moments in your life, moments where you felt frustration that events didn't unfold the way that you had expected. It is through letting go and letting God how we can now see perhaps how they unfolded perfectly, often in ways better than we could have ever imagined. I now let go easily, trusting in that perfection. And as we prepare to enter into this moment of silence, I invite you to continue to let go. Almost as if you just feel the burden lifting off your shoulders. Just imagining yourself floating weightlessly. No anxieties, no worries, no burdens. As we choose to just truly practice the art of letting go as we move into our moment of silence. And as we turn our attention back to this present moment, we continue to just easily let go, trusting in the perfection that is God, is your higher self. Doing what is mine to do and simply releasing the rest. Remembering to do this always through the breath, always coming back to the breath. Coming back to the breath and pausing and just releasing. Truly letting go and letting God. And so it is. Namaste. At home, so I'm going to trust that everybody's doing that and thinking this wonderful music we've had here this morning. So I think I've started to adapt to Wisconsin because, what was it, yesterday I think it was like 25 or something like that, but it was warm to me, so I was like, man, I have adapted, so. Yeah, Steve says I'm a Scotty, so a Scotty with a Texas accent. Hey, that's quite the hybrid, but anyway. So today kicks off the week one, our first day of our 6-week book study, and it's over the book, Don't Tell Me to Relax, Emotional Resilience in the Age of Rage, Feels, and Freakouts by Ralph de la Rosa. And some of you, this is the first time I've read anything from him, but he's also the author of The Monkey is the Messenger, in case that's familiar to anyone. But I've read the first 3 chapters, and I have to say I'm really enjoying it so far. It's a very enlightening book, and he very much talks about his own experiences, which I really like because it's easy for me to be able to relate to when I read things like that. But like I said, in the book, he discusses, and it's a mouthful, emotional resilience in the age of rage, feels, and freakouts. And when I saw that, I'm sitting here thinking, those are some really good topics worth discussion, aren't they? I mean, anyone feeling any rage, feels, and freakouts right now? I mean, I know that I have, which is one of the reasons why I'm looking so forward to this study. So chapter 1 kicks right off with a quote from author Carol Osborne, where she says, "Mastering the art of resilience does much more than restore you to who you once thought you were. Rather, you emerge from the experience transformed into a truer expression of who you were really meant to be." So I read this and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, I always knew that resilience was powerful, but this is some really good stuff. This is promising to be some really good stuff. It's forcing me to take a second look at resilience and what it may truly mean for me and for all of us on our path of spiritual growth. Now, Mr. De La Rosa jumps directly into this by first mentioning his own experience with spiritual awakening. And he shares a journey of his own and how it really started with his experience at being bullied in school. Now, during his spiritual awakening, he came to really understand bullying on a little bit of a deeper level, and about how it really just all came down to power, and how that power was really about safety versus vulnerability. He began to realize that certain guys in school were bullying him so as not to appear to be invulnerable, or to appear to be vulnerable, because they felt that in that vulnerability was weakness. And they would bully him so as not to appear to be weak. And this led Mr. De La Rosa to begin to put himself in the shoes of those who are often some of the more vulnerable in our society, or as seen as some of the more vulnerable in our society. And due to that vulnerability, often become targets for bullying and other similar types of treatments. So he began to experience these feelings of anger inside. Anger over these injustices that he would witness and abuses that he would witness. And after a while, he says he became such an angry person that those around him began to tell him, they're like, you're just really not any fun anymore. You just need to kind of chill out and relax a little bit. But I think this can happen to most of us, and has probably at some point or the other. It's almost like we have our own type of awakenings. A veil almost seems to lift, and when this happens, we can find ourselves feeling these really strong feelings and emotions. And these emotions may not necessarily be anger or another like emotion, but it might be. So Mr. De La Rosa began to understand that his anger in and of itself wasn't really helping himself or anyone else. It wasn't translating into any real type of action or organizing. But I do want to add something here, talking about anger and like feelings. Sometimes these feelings can be the catalyst, but don't in and of themselves translate into any real action. But they can be the catalyst that leads to real action. We just have to use these feelings and emotions for them to do so. We have to use them productively and to drive change. And he mentions something here that I want to talk about. He talks about expressing and communicating. So think about this scenario for a minute. I come in here on a Sunday morning and I've read about something that I see wrong with the world. And I get up here and I just start talking about it incessantly. I'm angry. You can tell I'm angry. You can tell I'm just ticked off. I lash out. I raise my voice up here. I'm trying not to laugh at Pete. He's over there making gestures. But I might even get up here and just start ranting about it, just, in a angry sort of way. And we've all seen those preachers that get up on the podium and get angry. Veins start bulging, pull out my handkerchief, wipe my forehead with it. Say I bring that here. But the thing I'm probably missing at that moment is true communication. I would be up here expressing my anger, expressing the anger that I feel and my frustration, but am I really communicating when I do that? Probably not really. My anger is certainly going to appeal to people that are in my circles and agree with me, right? People that feel the same way that I do about that specific issue. And those people are likely going to agree with me. They're likely going to express right along with me. But is that anger really going to reach those that don't agree with me or those that see it differently? Is it really going to start conversation? And am I really likely to drive change? Probably not unless I take that anger that I'm feeling and I use it as a catalyst. Maybe the catalyst to start those conversations with people who don't agree or feel the same way. And to begin to find constructive ways to deal with whatever it is that I'm angry about. Mr. De La Rosa says, if you have an important message you think might help change the world, that's a message that needs to be communicated, not just simply expressed. But oftentimes in that also, we can sometimes help to heal ourselves in the process. Because sometimes those things that we feel the most strongly about are because of something that's very much tied to our past and something that happened in our past. For me personally, I begin to feel feelings of anger when I see people of color being treated differently. That really evokes those feelings of anger within me. And most of mine started from witnessing this injustice. Now, I grew up in a pretty segregated part of West Texas. White people lived in certain areas and people of color lived in others. And I went to school that contained all races, but contact outside of that were pretty limited due to the segregation of the city. And as a result, I really didn't think about a lot of those injustices because I didn't have to. I wasn't forced to. That was until I met Robert. Now, Robert was a friend of mine in the military, and he and I, we would hang out, outside of our work on base. We'd go to movies, we'd go to arcades. We just would have a really good time together. And one thing I began to notice is that people would stare at us when we were out. Because you see, Robert was African American, and people acted like they had never seen a white guy and a black guy hanging out before. Now, this was during a time when he and I were both going through military training, and as a result, we were stationed at an Air Force base, again in a smaller Texas town. And I really first started noticing this when he and I entered into a department store. Christmas was coming, and he wanted to buy some nice perfume for his mother. So we walked up to the counter. And we stood there for what seemed like to be a really long time waiting for somebody to help us. And I noticed several employees were standing around doing nothing, but nobody was coming over to help. So finally, somebody seems to begrudgingly walk over, and she looks at me. And she asks if she can help me, completely ignoring Robert standing there. And he acted like it was no big deal. But later I found out that was because for him, he was used to it. He was used to that kind of treatment. And the stares we get, how security would follow us around when we were in stores, that never happened to me when I was by myself. This caused such an anger to begin to well up inside me. And I found myself feeling so much anger over stories like those of George Floyd. And I remember back to the story of Rodney King. And it's a very palpable anger for me over the ways in which I witnessed Robert being treated differently than I was, just due to the color of his skin. And sure, my friendship with Robert's come and gone, and we both ended up stationed on separate continents. But as Mr. De La Rosa says in our book, the past is right here in our bodies. So we absorb these things that happen in our past into our minds and our bodies. And as our author says, our emotions are laced with the past. So for me, this resistance to the BLM movement, this has brought all of those emotions back up to the surface for me. And there are times when I express my feelings of anger. I express them rather than communicating them. But then I remember. I remember that I must communicate these things to be a part of the change. I must use my anger that I'm feeling as a catalyst if I want for others to understand me rather than simply just hear me scream in frustration. Now, Mr. De La Rosa says this is a promising truth. For if the past is not gone, it is not set in stone either. So he mentions that we can rewire our emotional patterns to perhaps even help us to rewrite some of our memories. And I feel anger over all that Robert and other people of color have had to endure, but I'm also learning that maybe I can help rewrite that memory to the moment that I decided I could be a help to help drive change. Helping to make the change that future generations won't have to endure all that Robert had to endure and probably still has to endure today. Now, chapter 2 opens with a quote from German poet Charles Bukowski. What matters most is how well you walk through the fire. So I ask you today, do you choose to walk through the fire, or do you choose to just stand there and remain within it and allow yourself to be destroyed in the process? Now, of course, I'm not talking about that literally, maybe metaphysically or figuratively, but which one would you choose? So let's talk about the feeling of anger and such emotions now. How many of us always walk around feeling upbeat and happy, always with a skip in our step? As much as we'd like to, probably not many of us. Or we think that if we aren't walking around happy all the time that there's a problem. Maybe we aren't spiritual enough, or maybe we're not doing something, serious enough on this study. Maybe we're just seriously screwing up this spiritual path somehow, just because we're not happy all the time. It's because anger and such emotions, such as anger, aren't necessarily seen as beautiful, are they? We're taught to just stuff it down, to just ignore it, and to just get rid of those types of feelings or emotions. But remember earlier when I mentioned using those types of feelings and emotions as a catalyst? What if we did that? How would it begin to look? What if we begin to realize that not all feelings or emotions have to always be seen as beautiful? What if we realize that all of our thoughts and feelings, beautiful or not, can be the launching pads for transformation? Mr. De La Rosa mentions that anger is almost never random. It has intelligence. And this is true. We usually feel anger because it's trying to tell us something. Maybe trying to set a better boundary. Maybe it's telling you to set a better boundary. Maybe to let us know that we're not being treated with respect. Maybe let us know that we were just insulted and that that's just not right. Anger usually exists to address some kind of hurt. Maybe it's due to a childhood emotional trauma or wound. Maybe even one that just happened to us in adulthood. Maybe even something that just happened to you yesterday. But sometimes it comes in such a way that is expressive and it lashes out. It can sometimes even turn us into someone that people closest to us don't even recognize. And like Mr. De La Rosa, they may tell you, hey, just kind of chill out and relax just a bit. But almost any feeling or emotion, especially those that we don't always perceive as beautiful, can begin to have adverse effects, can't they? We've all got stories. And it's our stories that drive how we interact with the world, whether we're conscious of this or not. It's happening. Things from our past help to create those stories. The ways in which we were treated or not treated, the ways in which we interacted with others and how they interacted with us. These are all part of our story today and how we interact with the world today. All of these things have helped shape who we are today. All of these things from our past. And remember, the past is no longer alive. In other words, we're no longer living there yet. It affects us today in this present moment. So the third chapter of our book starts with a quote from Bohemian Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke when he says, "No feeling is final." So Mr. De La Rosa talks about ways in which we can begin to move forward. Ways in which we can use anger and other strong feelings and emotions as that catalyst to help drive change today, whether in our own lives, the lives of others, or probably even both, really. And he talks about 4 useful skills in which to do this, to begin to shift that inner dialogue. The first is pause, and he mentions the power of pause. So think about this for a moment. Say you're watching a child. Suddenly you see the child pick up your favorite vase, and before you know it, it slips from the child's grasp and it just shatters all over the floor in hundreds of pieces. And in that moment, you've got a couple of choices. One is to yell at the child and to punish him or her, maybe not physically even, but emotionally. Or you can just pause for just a moment. This is the beauty of pause. We don't have to express that anger or that frustration we may be feeling in that moment of the broken vase. But we can pause first and maybe even approach the child and ask her if she hurt herself, if she's cut herself anywhere. Allowing ourselves to calm down and to realize that at the end of the day, it was only a vase. But we've got to be prepared to pause first, right? It's usually best to prepare ourselves for something when we're not right in the middle of a strong emotion. And Mr. De La Rosa mentions doing so when we aren't feeling triggered. And to do this, we can check in with ourselves throughout the day, on any given day. We can pause throughout the day to just check how we're feeling. And we pause throughout the day a lot of times to check our email or our social media accounts, right? So why not check in with ourselves? Do the same practice and check in with ourselves in the way we're feeling as well. Now, the second skill he talks about is something he calls unblending. So at this point, we've paused. We now begin to take a step back, giving space between us and that strong feeling or emotion. And sometimes we have to take that step back to allow ourselves to see the entire picture so that we don't miss the small details. He talks about a painting. If you're right up on the painting, you're not going to be able to see the whole picture, and you're going to miss a lot of small details. So you take a step back to be able to see the whole painting. Now, he tells us unblending is a way of reclaiming your agency in moments where you feel triggered. And to do this, we sometimes unblend ourselves from whatever it is that's causing such strong emotions or feelings. Now, the third skill he mentions is to allow curiosity, to get curious, he says. He says when you stop and get curious about your emotional state, you can listen more clearly to the feeling, respond to the feeling, reason with the feeling, and bring compassion to the feeling. You can decide then whether the feeling is something you'd really like your actions to be informed of or not. So think about the times in history where we've witnessed curiosity and the results that came from that curiosity. We were once curious about the moon, what it would be like to travel there and to step foot on it. Recently, curious about the planet, we landed a new rover on Mars. Each new curiosity we have brings about the next possibility of where it could lead or what may happen. And Mr. De La Rosa says, when we touch curiosity, we graze the rim of infinite possibility. And he likens curiosity to compassion. He says that curiosity is an entry-level compassion. It's entry-level compassion because when we get curious and inquisitive, we are on our way to understanding things in a new way, he says. So allow yourself to be curious and allow your inner dialogue to shift to new conversations, those that may very well create a new understanding. And speaking of that, the last skill he mentions is shifting that inner conversation. And this is probably the biggie, right? That inner conversation is sometimes the thing we feel we can't quiet. Just like the Buddhists call it, the monkey mind. At least quiet it the way we'd like to oftentimes. But by this point, we've paused, we've unblended, and we've piqued our curiosity. Now we just need to begin to shift that inner conversation. This is now the time to start asking ourselves questions about how we're feeling. What feelings our curiosity has led us to notice? What emotions and feelings are currently present? what these emotions and feelings may be trying to tell us, to say to us. And you've likely heard me say this before if you've heard me speak before, but it's the time to be gentle with ourselves. We likely wouldn't scold a child who's learning and growing and asking questions about our world. So why would we do this to ourselves, especially when we're still learning and growing? Why can't we just pull up a chair, go within, and meet that curious, inquisitive part of ourselves right where we're at right now? Being gentle and being willing to go however long or short it takes, because we all will do this at different time frames. Because that's where the healing is at. That's where the true growth is. So you see, change doesn't happen from the outside in. Well, there are things on the outside that are often the catalyst to that change. That's not where it happens. It happens from the inside out. And we can practice these skills that bring about these changes as we go about our day. We can implement them into the spiritual practices that most of us likely already do. But it doesn't even have to be that. It can even be in daily chores that we already do. You just have to be willing. And today I ask you to be willing. I ask you to follow us as we move through this study with an openness and a willingness, with an open heart and an open mind, and to dare to be that change. Namaste. And I'm now going to invite the jazz band back up for some more music.